Electricity Transmission Compensation Bill, as amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
No amendments on consideration. Third reading what day? No. Dr. Liam Fox.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is one of the inbuilt oddities of democratic politics that there tend to be more plaudits generated by dealing with a problem than preventing a problem. And yet this is exactly what this legislation sets out to do. We have a problem in North Somerset. The point of this legislation is to prevent it from becoming a problem to those in constituencies in other parts of the country. As we move to replace our dependence on fossil fuels for strategic and environmental reasons with increased use of renewables and nuclear, there is a need for new infrastructure for electricity transmission. As I have said at every stage, in every debate in this bill, it is something that we all accept to be necessary. However, in doing so, we must not allow the rights of individuals to be overridden by the systems for compensation and the legislation that we have at the present time. Now, for those who haven't yet seen what is coming to the rest of the country, and they want to get a look at the new T-pylons, which will replace the classic ones that we've all become used to, feel free to take a drive down the M5, and you shall see what looks like something out of, I think, War of the Worlds appearing across the countryside. Now, it's a matter of taste, whether people find them attractive or unattractive, although for the life of me I cannot understand why we have chosen white, just about the most standout colour that has the greatest impact on the visual environment for these particular pylons. I think a coat of green paint wouldn't go amiss to get them to blend in better with the countryside. Who knows, in time we may come to accept them visually, just as we've come to accept the previous pylons. Now, in our case, this occurred because as we increase the voltage in our overhead cables, and as we get the new infrastructure to link the new Hinkley C nuclear power station with Avonmouth, actually the quickest route would have been the undersea route. The shortest route would have been the undersea route, and I still think it was a huge mistake for that not to go ahead. However, that is simply to go over history. We now have the new pylons, and the problem that we face is that as a result, as a combination of planning law and the current compensation methods, it hugely favours the companies such as National Grid and the distribution companies over our constituents. In short, if they want to put an access road to build the new pylons, or they want to ensure that they have the right to maintain in time, they are able to do so. If constituents object, they can be compulsorily purchased, and at the present time, if National Grid tell you that you get a certain amount of compensation and you don't like it, you end up effectively having to go to the court system, which can be hugely expensive for individuals. And therefore, there is not much point in having rights in law if you effectively can't enforce those rights because it's too expensive to do so. And the whole point of this particular bill was to redress that problem, to ensure that we get timely, accessible and affordable arbitration that is binding, which means our constituents can get fair access to justice and in a way that does not potentially result in huge cost financially to them. As I told the committee, when one of my constituents, who was actually the genesis of this bill, went to National Grid and said, "I'm not willing to accept your treatment in this, I'm going to go to see my MP," they were told, "Fine, go and see him, he won't be able to do anything about it." Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, one of the great things about being an elected member of Parliament is that we can do something about it. And I hope that individual is listening and watching as we actually do something to redress that balance in the David and Goliath struggle and help our constituents deal with it. Now, most of the issues that we raised in the House at second reading were dealt with, I think, very successfully by the amendments that were brought forward in committee. I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend, the Minister, for his extremely constructive disposition throughout the process of this bill, something I came to understand when I worked with him at the Department for International Trade. We, in particular, I think, made progress, and I would welcome him just reiterating that disputes that are not settled when the legislation comes into effect will still be covered by the legislation itself. It's not a matter of seeking retrospection, but it is a matter of ensuring that where disputes have not been settled, that our constituents will be able to utilise the provisions of this legislation in doing so. But there is one issue that is perhaps not as completely settled as I would like it to have been at this point. Under the bill as it is written, it relates, of course, to new transmission, and I would be very grateful if my right honourable friend would confirm that this would also include distribution, which, of course, is a slightly lesser issue in terms of our constituents. But if we replace that distribution network as well as part of the government's drive towards net zero and decarbonisation, there could be considerable disruption for our constituents as a consequence. And the question arises then, at what point does updating and upgrading become new, which would then bring it within the scope of the bill? I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He's making a powerful speech and a powerful case in the protection of all of our constituents. But on the point he just raised, will you agree with me that such disruption is coming down the line? We're seeing a huge increase in the number of companies wanting to install solar panels, particularly on the roofs of distribution centres, warehouses up and down the country, but are finding that they actually can't because there isn't a nearby substation to take the power in. And if we are to have that revolution in solar energy on the rooftops of the United Kingdom, such fundamental change to distribution and to substations is going to come.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising that point, and it's absolutely true that we will require substantial new infrastructure. But if we are going to do that successfully, then surely we need the assent of the people of the country to do so. And if we're to do that, we have to ensure that they're given the appropriate mechanisms by which they can seek redress should they come into conflict with some of the very large corporations that I mentioned earlier. So I'd be grateful if my right honourable friend could just deal with that issue. I would like for him to be able to tell us that as we develop this upgraded distribution network, that will count as new infrastructure and therefore will fall within the remit of the task force which he's going to set up. I welcome very much the acceptance of the amendments which I think fulfil the cross-party spirit of support that we had throughout this process, although I don't see it very visually represented on the backbenches opposite today, but I know that their support was there, and I look forward to my right honourable friend coming forward with the details of the task force. And I would say to him in that there are two things that we will specifically want to see. The first is a speedy process by which the task force is not only set up but comes to its conclusions so that we can get as early a utilisation of this legislation by our constituents. And secondly, that the task force itself will be fully representative, that it will not be simply from the producer side of the equation, but will be at least equally weighted in terms of those whose properties may be affected, not least the farmers up and down the country who are likely to be affected more than most. I'm very grateful to the government for the support of this bill, and I look forward to this bill becoming law, and I look forward even more to my right honourable friend having the opportunity to clarify these small points in the way that I know he is more than capable of doing.
Would my right honourable friend give way? Just before he sits down.
Well, after I've concluded, but before I sit down, so I suppose that's just in the nick of time, of course.
I thank my honourable friend. I thank my honourable friend for giving way at that last moment. I just wanted to clarify for my constituents in Watford, who may not be directly impacted by this bill, but I'm sure are very supportive of it. Could he just clarify that ultimately this is about fairness? It's about fair competition, fair compensation rather, for disruption. But ultimately it ties into the fact that increasingly people are using electricity far more, whether it be charging their mobile phones, electric cars and so much more. So as the infrastructure grows, we need to make sure there's fair compensation for those where they might need to put that infrastructure in place on their own sites.
As my honourable friend shows yet again, the timing is everything in politics. He makes the point that his constituents may not be affected by this bill. I would correct that, if I may, and say not affected by the changes yet, because these changes are coming to the whole country sooner or later. We in North Somerset may be at the beginning of that process and may therefore have been the ones who have been most affected up till this point. But as we move towards decarbonisation and net zero, there will need to be, as my honourable friend said, there will need to be an upgrade of our entire system of both transmission and distribution. And as we use more electricity, as my honourable friend says, there will be all the more need for that system to be robust. So therefore, the provisions of this bill, while they may not affect a number of constituencies yet, they will at some point affect them all. And as I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the beginning, we don't always get credit in politics for preventing a problem. Let's hope that today is the exception that proves the rule.
Well, Friday's always a